Um, so welcome everyone to today's webinar, Best Practices for Interpreting Similarity Check Reports. This webinar is being recorded and we hope that this will be a very enjoyable and productive meeting for everyone. And we expect everyone to hold to the Crossref Code of Conduct. The focus of today's webinar is to make the most out of the Similarity Check service by understanding how to interpret the Similarity Check service reports effectively, with a special focus on what to do when an overlap is found between a paper and its preprint. So in today's session, we have three very experienced speakers, and it's my pleasure to introduce all of them. Our first speaker today is Kathleen Luschek, who is a technical support specialist at Crossref. She joined Crossref as part of the member experience team in 2019, having previously worked at the University of Hawaii Libraries, managing their institutional repositories and open access policy. She's also spent some time working in open access publishing at PLOS. Today, she will give us a brief overview of how the Similarity Check service works, how to identify if the source of overlap is preprints, and why is that important. Our second speaker is Audrey Kenni-Nemaleu. Audrey has worked in scholarly publications for over 10 years. She is an editor at the Pan-African Medical Journal, where she is also responsible for ethics in publication and for liaising with various organizations. She has conducted workshops on ethical issues in the publication process. She is an ambassador for Crossref in Cameroon since 2022 and also a consultant for a Cameroonian foundation named FEWA. She is passionate about ethics and communication. Our third and final speaker will be Rose Krupa Verity. Rose has worked in scholarly publications since 2023. After completing her degree in liberal arts at the University of Bristol, she worked as a publishing intern at a multidisciplinary publisher. Rose became a research integrity officer at the Institute of Physics Publishing in July 2023, where she's worked ever since. During that time, Rose has worked on a broad range of investigations, helping to resolve ethical concerns and protect the integrity of the scholarly record. She has run trials investigating the effects of internal policy changes and how this can protect, she has run trials investigating the effects of internal policy changes and how this can protect integrity of the scholarly record. Last year, she also established an exhaustive best practice directory for ethical investigations, making education about ethical issues more accessible to the wider business. Both Audrey and Rose will share their experiences of interpreting similarity check reports, exploring how to evaluate results, and include tips on what factors to consider when assessing the overlap score and what to do when overlap is found between paper and its preprint. We will have time for Q&A at the end of all the presentations, but as you're listening to the presentation, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box that you can find at the bottom of your screen. So that we can get them answered during the session and take them up at the end as well. Just to remind everyone, this session is being recorded. If you're not comfortable being on camera, please feel free to turn your video off. With this, I would welcome all three of our speakers, thank them for joining us today, and hand it over to our first speaker, Kathleen.
Thank you, Mandara. Let me share my screen. And hopefully now you can see my slides.
Yes.
Great, okay. So yeah, I'm just gonna do a quick overview of the Similarity Check service, speak a little bit about some of the settings in both versions of iThenticate, and then I'll pass it over to Audrey and Rose, who will speak more from an editorial perspective of interpreting the reports. So just a quick agenda of the parts that I'm going to cover. Like I said, there's just the Similarity Check services, the settings, and then very quickly at the end, just kind of the impacts of what it means to, when there are problems with preprints and when editors decide that preprints should be removed, how that does not follow our best practices. So first we'll just cover the basics. This will be a very, very high level overview of the service. So one of the first things I like to cover though is even members who have had the Similarity Check service for a long time, and even those of us at Crossref, often get confused on the terminology because it can be confusing. So I just wanted to take this moment to go over some of the definitions. So our Similarity Check service is a service that Crossref offers to publishers with a way to actively engage in efforts to identify similarity between submitted manuscripts and already published text. The members are provided with access to Turnitin's text comparison tool, iThenticate. So Turnitin is the company who has created the software and who maintains it. The tool itself is called iThenticate. This allows them to compare their documents against a large database of scientific, technical, medical, and other scholarly content. And the Similarity Check members contribute their own published content into iThenticate's database of full text literature so that it can also be compared against from other members. Generally how the service works, and I think Audrey will go into this in Rose as well, with a little more detail, is basically that as a member, you upload a document to the iThenticate software. A similarity report is produced, and the editor will take a look and make a decision about whether the similarity detected is legitimate or if further investigation is required. This is what we mean when we say that you shouldn't just look at the number that is produced from the report, but sometimes there are other factors involved and it needs a bit more investigation. When members publish new content, they'll provide a link to that full text, which Turnitin then indexes and adds that item to their database. It's just kind of a quick overview of how that process works. I'm going to dive into a little bit of detail about both versions of iThenticate and some of the settings. And before I go into that, I know we've had working in support at Crossref. I know we have had lots of questions about the two versions of iThenticate and who can use which one. We have been working for the past few years on upgrading some members to V2. And at this time, we are now doing a push where we will be working on upgrading everyone from iThenticate V1 to iThenticate V2. And so if right now you're on V1, don't worry, we will be reaching out to you within the next few months and working with you to get you upgraded to V2. So don't worry if you're you think you need to upgrade right now, we'll be reaching out to you soon and we're going through that. So setting that aside, within the settings for iThenticate V1, there's no flag in V1 for preprints. That is something that was introduced in V2, so that's another advantage of being upgraded to V2. But you can exclude other preprints registered with Crossref from being flagged. So if you want to remove those, you can unclick the Crossref posted content. That means it won't search other preprints that have been published by or registered with Crossref. So if you want to exclude preprints altogether as being matches, you can do it that way in V1. Here's a quick view of what a similarity report looks like in V1. If you notice, I mean, I took a preprint straight from Research Square and put it through, so you can see what that looks like. You can see over on the right-hand column where it says match overview, it's at 92%, and you can see where that source is from. So while it's not flagged, if you are an editor and familiar with some of the preprint repositories, you'll see right away that the reason the match is so high is because it has been posted on Research Square. So there is a way of hopefully quickly identifying that. In V2, there are a few different ways you can adjust your settings. You can exclude posted content from your repositories in a similar way as in V1, in both the General Settings tab and within the report specifically. You can also specifically exclude all preprint sources from being shown in your similarity report as well, if you like. This is the general settings. So here you can also adjust, and this is what I was referring to before about flagging the preprints, is that you can adjust within the general settings if you would like your preprint labels as such. You can label them and include them in the report. You can label them and exclude them from the report, or you can just leave them as regular sources without a label. So you have some flexibility there on how you would like to handle the preprints and how much you would like them identified. And maybe you exclude them altogether because if your editorial workflow doesn't matter for that, you can do so. And then here is an example of what that flag looks like in the similarity report in iThenticate v2. As you can see, there is a flag on it that says specifically that it is a preprint source. And then finally, I'm just going to quickly wrap up so I can pass it over to Audrey and Rose, who will talk in more depth about their own experiences using Similarity Check and how they deal with preprints specifically. But from our side, from the Crossref side of things, and from a general scholarly perspective, is that preprints are an important part of the scholarly record. We often have authors contacting us saying that their manuscript was rejected by a publisher due to the existence of a preprint. Crossref will only request a removal of the full text content from Turnitin's database at the request of the publisher. So we have to have, it's usually a preprint server or preprint repository that will contact us and request that preprint be removed. I put some numbers here from the past 3 years, this year and the prior 2 years, of the number of preprint requests that we have received from Research Square for those preprints to be removed from Turnitin's database. So what is happening here is that authors are getting their manuscripts rejected from publishers because they have a preprint. And this is not best practice. We want to encourage researchers to have preprints, and it's part of the province of the scholarly record for them to do so. And so removing the preprint is really not what we want to see happen. So what's happening here is that editors will reject a manuscript and say you have to remove this preprint. So they'll go to Research Square, for example, ask them to take down the preprint, and then Research Square will reach out to us and ask that Turnitin remove it from their database. Then that author will resubmit to the editor at whatever publisher that is, and then we assume it will be the manuscript will be accepted because now there's no match to a preprint. This is what has been troubling over the past few years, and a trend that we would like to see end. So this is part of the reason why we were hoping to have a larger conversation about this topic, and also why we invited Rose and Audrey to join us so that they could speak a little bit about their experiences from the publishing side and how they deal with preprints. So I will stop there, and I will stop sharing my screen so that I can pass this over to Audrey, and you can take it from here.
Thank you, Kathleen. Share my screen. Hello, everyone. Share my screen. Okay, so we're talking about the best practice for interpreting similarity check reports. It's very important to use similarity check. It's very simple at the same time. First of all, you have different ways using the similarity service with your journal workflow. The first, you can upload a file. You can upload every file and paste it, a part of text. You can compare two documents, and something great is that you can share your folders with colleagues. So the best practice actually is to make sure you compare articles that you are almost sure of publishing to avoid comparing several times and paying more additional fees. And also, it's important to note that iThenticate does not conclude to plagiarism or double publication. So it only highlights part of text that he found similar with other manuscripts in its database. So we advise editors to compare articles that are almost ready for publication, and also to interpret well the reports that is given with from iThenticate.
Sorry to interrupt you, Audrey. We are not able to hear you very well. Would you like to try moving closer to the mic or using your microphone?
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me now?
It's a bit better. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I was saying that here's how the page looks like when you want to upload a file. This is how it looks like, and this is how it looks like when you want to compare two documents. This is how the page looks like, and once the comparison, once the document is submitted to iThenticate, you have a report, and that report contains many information. The first information is a global score, and also their percentage per journal. And you can always see those percentage if you include the sources. So if you look at my screen, you'll see right here, I don't know if you're seeing, you'll see the global score here, and you also find some percentage per journal once you include the source. But if you exclude the source, you will have no percentage per journal. So these are some settings. If you want to include the sources or exclude the sources, you can use this filter and setting comment to do that. So once you have the report, so how do we interpret? First of all, like I said before, iThenticate does not determine the plagiarism. It is your interpretation that concludes with plagiarism or not. And also, it may appear the percentage is just mention only the authors that are credited in the work, in the study. So there are some journals that have particular structures. For example, medical journals, for instance, they have particular structures. We have an introduction method with results and discussion section. So for those journals, it is important to focus on some of these sections, particularly the results section, because the other section, like introduction and methods, might be very similar from one study to the other, because the methods are the same almost all the time. So what is done when you find a high score in the similarity project? First of all, do not think it's a plagiarism. It may be a preprint. So what you have to do is to, first of all, inform the author. While informing the author, you may suspend the processing of your manuscript for further investigation, and after the investigation, if the plagiarism is confirmed, you have to reject the manuscript only if the plagiarism is confirmed. So here we have a report. And if you look at the reports, you see that there are lots of parts that are highlighted. And if you have this yellow underline here that shows the citation. So this text, this author has particularly quoted lots of authors. So in this case, you may ask the author to rewrite his text, to personalize his text, like to have more information coming from him. It's just like this example shows that he just copied one phrase from an author and the other. So you can ask him to rewrite the text and put more information, more personal information from his particular study. Here you have another report that shows there are part of text that are highlighted. There are common words that you may use that are commonly used in scientific writing. So these are not plagiarized text. It's just more common terms that are used in publication in scientific writing. So what is done when the overlap is high between the manuscript and the preprint? The first thing is to verify that the article is indeed on a preprint server. And commonly, there is an indication on that article on the server, on the preprint server, which the indication this article is a preprint. So the second thing is to make sure that the article is published anywhere else. You can do a random check online or on Google or any other platform that you use, any other browser that you use. And once you find out it's a preprint, there's no need to remove the manuscript from the management system, because we all know that preprints are not published articles. And once the article the article is published, as if it's a preprint, it means the article is not yet published. So you, as a journal, you can publish this article. So once this publication is done, you have to recontact the author so that he will send the details to the preprint server. So thanks. This is an example of a preprint article. This article was appearing on a preprint database, but we published it in our journal, in Pan-African Medical Journal, One Health. So you can see there's no need to interrupt the process of publication, because an article is already on a preprint database. So this is an example. I hope everyone was able to understand what I was saying. Thank you for your attention. I'll stop here, and I'll pass to Rose.
Thank you so much, Audrey. And I'm sorry that there were some technical challenges. Some of you were not able to hear, but I'm sure that Audrey, we can work something to provide maybe a transcript of something along with the recording, so that the attendees are able to see the script of the slides as well. Thank you for your patience, everyone. And over to you, Rose.
Okay, I will just share my presentation. There we go. Okay, so I will be talking to you as well about some best practices for interpreting similarity check reports. So, sorry, let me just move this. Oops, sorry. Okay, so Crossref Similarity Check is powered by Authenticate and works by comparing Crossref's registry of journal articles. This is over 170 million full-text scholarly content items and a substantial amount of readable content, which has been and is currently available on the internet. This tool can tell us whether a manuscript contains similarities to a large portion of online content or to a number of select privately accessible sources and a number of other integrity concerns. For example, Crossref Similarity Checker compares against online content, but it also compares against IOP Publishing's private repository, allowing us to compare against all historical submissions to IOPP journals. The tool also allows us to detect replaced characters and hidden text. So if authors try to use symbols from another alphabet in an attempt to evade plagiarism detection, we're also able to see the patterns of overlap to determine whether the work shows direct verbatim overlap or paraphrased overlap, which in turn is a really great tool for spotting tortured phrases in a work. So the similarity checker allows us to compare against a number of repositories. So the internet, publications from library databases, textbooks and digital reference collections, Crossref posted content, and again, IOP Publishing's private repository. So all the repository options can be turned on or off to allow for further clarity and accuracy when running a report. For example, if you only wanted to compare a work to historical submissions to IOPP, we could turn off the other repositories for the internet, publications, and Crossref posted content, leaving only the submitted works. If we wanted to do a highly specific comparison between two submissions, we would do a doc-to-doc comparison between the paper, and this is an especially helpful feature when dealing with ethical concerns such as parallel submission or redundant publication. So the excluding customized sections function allows us to provide the system details of other sections of a paper that we can automatically exclude. For example, we might look to exclude the phrases author contribution or acknowledgements as they often come up. If these phrases are flagged, the report lists them in the customized sections. This function may only have an incremental effect on the report results in some instances. It will, however, contribute to making the results far more accurate. So there's the percentage score. Human judgment should always be used to determine if the overlap flagged by the similarity checker is acceptable or if it's cause for concern. When a report is run, a coloured square will appear on the similarity column with a percentage next to it, indicating the overall percentage of similarity, as seen on the left-hand side of the screen here. The percentage of the overlap the report gives is indicative of the overall similarity score. If the report suggests a 20% overlap, this could be a 20% overlap to one source, but equally, it could be a 1% overlap to 20 different sources. It's also important to open and interpret reports if you're dealing with revisions of an original submission. So if you're running a revision of a submitted paper through CSC, the overall percentage may flag as particularly high. This is because the original version of the paper was uploaded to our private repository upon submission and will have a high level of overlap to a revision that the authors have since submitted. This doesn't mean that we'd automatically reject the revised work. We would have to open the report to see which sources the software has flagged overlap with. If it's the original submission, that's not much of an issue. However, if in the process of revising their work, the authors have introduced new overlap with another source, this might cause concerns or queries that we wish to raise with the authors. We don't typically give a percentage of overlap we consider acceptable to authors, as we have found that they can typically work to these percentages rather than trying not to plagiarize overall. So that's just something that we tend to do. The percentage given on a report also doesn't automatically determine that plagiarism has been committed, and therefore all reports must be open and interpreted on a case-by-case basis. Further, there is reused text that might have been legitimately cited, which contributes to a similarity score, such as quotes. And this is why certain settings, as we just mentioned, are added to the report prior to it being run. We'll also discuss a little bit more in the next section about that. So another thing when looking to interpret a report is to consider the novelty requirements of the journal the paper's been submitted to. So do they have a high novelty requirement? Do they allow authors to draw upon large sections of their own theses? And these are contextual things that we like to consider. So assessing overlap. As mentioned earlier, a low percentage score for a similarity report doesn't necessarily exclude a paper from containing misconduct. Therefore, there's lots to consider when assessing overlap and when interpreting a similarity report. I've included a lot on these slides about things that we consider at IOPP when we interpret reports, but I'll probably go over them a bit more briefly just because of the amount of time that would take. So the things that we consider are the amount of highlighted text. Is it paraphrased or verbatim? Is it in the method section? Is it fully referenced? All of these give us insight into the severity of the overlap and perhaps the author's intention. So were they purposely plagiarizing another's work or attempting to avoid detection? Or alternatively, have they poorly referenced the word that they're drawing from and expanding upon? When dealing with published works, we have to consider which source was published first. So if the IOPP work was published prior to the other source, then it's unlikely that they're the one plagiarizing, which would direct any ethical investigations in a different direction. As I just mentioned, it's also important to consider the journal's novelty requirements, but we may also consider the type of publication. For example, literature reviews are likely to have a higher percentage overlap due to the nature of the publication drawing on a high number of sources. However, we would want to assess whether that paper is presenting an original interpretation of those sources rather than regurgitating another's interpretation, and of course, whether they've been correctly referenced. It's also important for us to consider perhaps the more legal side of plagiarism reports. So if the highlighted parts of the report are a large portion, perhaps an important quote, do we need to seek permissions from the original authors or to reuse the source in our publication? Or alternatively, has third-party content been taken from elsewhere without proper reference or permission? Sometimes authors have overlap with their own previous works, and we often get the question, so why is this an issue when I'm reusing content from my own work? Well, firstly, we have to ensure that they're correctly attributing sources for copyright reasons. And secondly, it's important that we're transparent with the readers of the work, that this source is being reused from elsewhere. When we discussed where the area of overlap is earlier, I mentioned that it's probably more likely to have overlap in the method section of the work. This is because if the same experiment or research is being performed, we would expect authors to use standard terms and approaches. Additionally, we would expect authors to have a consistency in the method that they provide readers with. Therefore, it's important that this type of overlap is correctly referenced and really clear to the authors. Preprints. So preprints can sometimes flag as a high percentage of overlap with a single source when we run a similarity report on a submission. In general, we wouldn't consider this an issue regarding plagiarism. However, there are a few further checks that a submission being published as a preprint may cause us to do. We might consider it similar to a conference series paper, where authors can often republish their work as a paper in a proprietary journal. We would look to see if there are any copyright or permissions concerns that we need to address if we're going to publish the work, and have the authors been transparent and declared that preprint upon submission. They're also really useful as an ethical tool. We can look to see if there have been any unexplained changes in authorship, which could have broader copyright concerns or moral right concerns we would have to address. And have there been any drastic changes made to the work which might suggest something more concerning is going on? However, we would never automatically reject a work if it had been published as a preprint prior. So, handling cases of plagiarism. So, there are a number of things to consider when tackling instances of plagiarism, as we've covered in the assessing overlap slides. When we're certain that plagiarism has occurred, there are different approaches that we may take depending on the severity of the plagiarism and where it is in the text. So I've included two different scenarios that might occur when we've discovered overlap. So in the first instance, we've got a low level of overlap with the author's previous work on the same topic in the method section. It's referenced later on, and when queried, the authors explained that they're repeating the same research. So we would expect a certain level of overlap in the method section where the same experiment is being repeated, and the authors have already referenced their work later on and are clear in the text that they're doing the same experiment. So they're not attempting to hide the overlap with their previous work, but have not copied the methods verbatim. So we might consider this poor citation practice and use it as an opportunity to educate the authors for future submissions. In the second instance, we found paraphrased overlap throughout the discussion section and a number of tortured phrases. There's no reference to the overlap work anywhere in the submission, and when queried, the authors have only offered to rework their submission. So paraphrased or fragmented overlap suggests to us that the authors may have tried to evade plagiarism detectors, and tortured phrases really reinforce that feeling. So the authors have not attempted to explain why there's overlap in their work and are quick to offer to fix the problem without providing an explanation. We would never ask an author to rework or reduce overlap with another source, as it would give them the opportunity to hide the overlap and not properly attribute it to the original authors of that idea or bit of knowledge. So some things we like to keep in mind when we're querying overlap with authors is the attitude of the author. Are they apologetic? Are they transparent with us? Has the work been referenced elsewhere in the paper? And do the authors have a history of ethical misconduct? It really helps us build a bigger picture. So some examples. So here we've got some screenshots of a paper on microplastic and Ziploc bags, and I thought I could pull out some key points that we might look at when interpreting the similarity report. A really quick disclaimer, I have generated this work using Microsoft Copilot and manually created some plagiarism for the purposes of this example. So after running the report, we can see we have a really high percentage overlap flagged by this work at 98%. But opening the report, we can see that there's a high overlap with, in particular, with these two sources. Spoiler alert, these were two instances where I'd already run this paper I generated for this presentation. So if I were assessing the paper, I would exclude these works as they're affecting the accuracy of the overall report. In this instance, I don't need to see the level of overlap with previous iterations of this paper. However, after we've excluded those two sources, we can still see that this report has a high overall similarity score of 14%, meaning we would have to continue looking into the report to see if the overlap is present in the work, because it could be 14% of the overall paper that's overlapping with the work, or it could be 14% with a number of different sources. So here I've clicked on the first source of overlap, and we can see there's a significant overlap with the source in the introductory paragraph of this work, and no references or citations, which raises serious concerns as to the attribution of the work. There appears to be significant portions of overlap here, but to see how much and how frequently the other source was lifted from, we would have to have a look through the source on the right-hand side. So we can click through the source and we can see that overall the report has flagged 9 instances of overlap. And at the top on the right here, we have the second instance where there's verbatim overlap lifted directly from the original text. Interestingly enough, we can see that the source this was lifted from has references to 2 other works. This shows us a number of things. Firstly, that the authors of our paper have not attempted to reference the work correctly here, and it also raises the question of whether the authors have gone to the references from the work here to see where they got their ideas from, which is probably something we would expect them to do in the course of their research. So at the bottom on the right, we have the 4th instant, which is slightly different again. So we can see that there has been some attempt at editing the section lifted from the original source, and that they have changed certain words in an attempt to prevent the work being flagged by the plagiarism detector. So on the top left here, we can see in this example that the authors have really tried to reword the work. The paraphrasing is much more significant here and much more sporadic. In this instance, the overlap might initially be considered less concerning. However, looking at where the overlap is situated in the text, I can tell you that it's in the conclusion. We really wouldn't expect to see overlap in the conclusion of the work, as the author's supposed to be summarising the research that they have just done. So we ask ourselves the question, why would there be overlap here? Perhaps interesting to note that the AI I used to generate this work for the presentation had overlap with another work about microplastics and didn't suggest that we reference this particular source when we were generating it. It is perhaps paraphrased much more successfully than I did on the top left. And we can see that rather than copying the work verbatim, they've spliced together 2 disparate sections of the text. And this shows us why it's really important that we manipulate each similarity report. We need to look at each source that's presented for overlap. The work has a 4% overlap with this source, which might seem low. However, it's presenting this idea unattributed and unreferenced. And one thing we do when assessing reports is to ask ourselves the question, If someone took this section or idea from our own work, would you be upset if they hadn't given you correct attribution? Thank you for listening, everybody. I will stop sharing my slides now.
Thank you so much, Rose, and thank you, Audrey, for those wonderful presentations. Thank you, Kathleen. You have also been answering a lot of questions and typing away the answers. We have many questions that have come in, so we'll try to take as many as we can. Kathleen, I wonder whether I can direct the first question at you. Some people have been asking what happens when a preprint is already available online with a DOI. What should be done in those cases? I know you answered some of this, but maybe the wider audience would like to know that, if you have any insights.
Sure. That shouldn't make any difference. Many of the preprints have DOIs, and that's completely fine. I have put, and I'll put this in the chat as well. I've offered a link to our documentation, which further explains how this works. You have a preprint, and then you that has a DOI, and then there's a later version of that research, and everything checks out. You know, if you're looking at authorship and things like that, and it seems valid, then there should be no problem in publishing that. In the link that I've provided, you can see we do want you to link those two pieces of research, because that's part of the keeping track of the scholarly record, is that then you can see the version. It's basically versions of that research. So if you look there, you can read more about how that works. We would just ask that you update the metadata within Crossref to reflect both the preprint and then the later version of the content that it is linked to. I do have a question in the Q&A that I thought perhaps maybe Rose or Audrey could speak to, because it's more of an editorial question. And it says, it's the second one down, that if a manuscript is submitted for publication after a preprint has been made publicly available, but the authorship has changed, such that some original authors have been removed and new authors have been added, does this discrepancy warrant concern or require further investigation?
Yeah, I can.
Yes.
Oh, you go, Audrey.
Yeah. Yes. When there is an authorship issue with a preprint and the manuscript that is submitted to us this time, what we do is to contact the author and let him know first, notify him of what is happening. Because if you find there's authors A, B, and C in the preprint, and then you have C, D, and E in the manuscript submitted, it's clear that there's something that's going on. It's not. You have to investigate to know what is going on, and if there is no common author between the preprint and the manuscript submitted to your system, it means there is a problem. And my experience is that the best practice in this case is to reject the manuscript, because if you go further with the processing of the manuscript, perhaps you have more problems after the publication. So it's better in those cases to reject the manuscript. From an editorial side, I would say it's better not to not to interfere.
I think we have. We
Yeah,
are not able to
journal.
hear.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Audrey. Now we can hear you.
Okay, I was saying that if there's a difference between, if there's a common author between the preprint on the preprint server and the manuscript that you have that is submitted to your journal, if there's a common author, it means it may be the same author that published archive the preprint version. So you have to go to him so that he can explain what is going on, because sometimes the preprint is not the final version of an article. So once the preprint is online, someone else can still contribute to that article, maybe something like that. So we have to go back to the author to investigate. But if the authors are completely different, the advice is to take down the manuscript, because there's obviously a conflict of interest there, and it's better to take down the manuscript to avoid problem in the future. This is from an editorial part. My experience, that experience in a journal.
If we were dealing with it, we would see if there are some authors that were on the original preprint and some that are not on the submission that's since been submitted to one of our journals. We would have to query it because all authors have a moral right to attribution to their work, which is like in the UK falls under copyright law, and it's something that's we take it really seriously. So we would have to query with the authors. So why have these authors been taken off? Why have they not been given authorship on this page? If you're adding additional authors to the author list, and the author list has just grown rather than shrunk from the preprint, we would probably typically ask the authors to provide evidence of those authors' contributions. So this is especially when the overlap between the preprint and the submission is really high. So if there's no changes between the preprint or minimal changes between the preprint and the submission to our journal, how can we justify those changes in authorship? That would be the question we would ask. However, if there have been significant changes between the preprint and the submission to the journal, it's likely that those changes are more justified. However, we would still query it with the authors and ask them to provide us with evidence for that change, because issues of moral attribution and copyright are really serious, and there's something we would want to fully investigate before proceeding with the change. And that's why doing like a dot-to-dot comparison in instances such as these is really helpful for us to judge the level of change that's gone on between the preprint and the submission to the journal.
Thank you so much. I actually had a question for you, Rose. Oftentimes we hear many editors or journals saying that they talk about a certain threshold that when it comes to similarity score, they set a certain threshold, and anything above that is considered unacceptable. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I think as I've said in the presentation, we don't really set an acceptable threshold because we find that people work to the threshold rather than trying not to plagiarize in the first place. And I think the concern with that is, even if it's only 8% overlap with another source, what you might be taking from that source is a really significant idea or piece of knowledge that you're claiming as your own if you don't appropriately attribute it, or if you are just taking it verbatim from another source. So the percentage, or like that's why we open all of the individual sources, because the percentage might help us see the level overall that we have in the paper, but that particular section might be a really significant bit that was taken from another source. So the percentage, while useful, doesn't really have a weighting on whether or not it's considered plagiarism, which is why we have to interpret it all manually, no matter what the percentage is.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. If anybody has any other questions for any of our speakers, please continue to add them in the Q&A box. And in the meantime, maybe I can ask a question to Audrey as well. Audrey, do you have any suggestions for any other additional resources or any guidance that's available for journals or publishers as they are, developing their policies on using similarity check? Say, for example, do you, COPE or any other guidelines that you're using?
Um, The policy we are using with our journals is once we have a score, a high score of similarity report, we often go back to the author. I think the policy that we advise is to always go back to the author and ask for and query about it, because sometimes the author may have an explanation to this. So the author may have an explanation to this, and this is always go back to the author, whether the overlap is high or reduced. Always go back to the author before taking any action. Go back to the author. If there's any policy I can share, is go back to the author, whatever reports you have.
Great, thank you, Audrey. Another question that has come in, and I wonder any of our speakers have experience with this, is can we discuss the red flag feature on the iThenticate report? I've noticed that it sometimes raises false alarms. So how should we interpret and address these cases? Does anybody have any experience of using the red flag feature and can speak to that?
I've seen it come up, but I've never had any particular concerns when using it. It's not something that I have found has impacted any of my plagiarism reports when interpreting them.
I see. Thank you, Rose. I don't see any more questions. A lot has already been answered by Kathleen. I wonder, Rose or Audrey or Kathleen, do you have any final thoughts to share with our participants? Anything that you'd like to emphasize that can help our editors in interpreting their similarity check reports?
Yes, I would like to invite editors to understand that the preprint is part of the the publishing industry. We can't just put the preprint aside. So when we are using a similarity check to compare the manuscript that we have, we always have to think up to remember that the preprint do exist. So if you have a high score or a high score, we should always ask ourselves, is this a preprint, and do a further investigation.
We've had a question come in and would request editorial perspectives on this. So when you post a preprint online, it risks revealing the author's identities through external search engines. And so could this be one of the reasons why editors of double anonymized journals prefer not to allow preprints? So I wonder whether wearing your publisher or editor hat, do you have any thoughts on this? Either Rose or Audrey?
I think it could be an issue. I think it depends if your peer reviewer is going to go and do that research. I don't think typically peer reviewers are encouraged to run like a Crossref similarity check report themselves. Like that's not something that we do with our journals. So unless they're aware of the publication prior to reviewing the paper, I'm not sure how that would flag up. I've not personally peer reviewed myself, but we've done a little anonymize. We would like take all of the identifying information that we could off of the PDF prior to it being shared with the reviewer. So any acknowledgement that, you know, this was previously a preprint, which can be found here, that would be removed and not shared prior to that. I hope that's helpful. Sorry, I haven't got a more detailed answer for you with that one, really.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you, Rose. We still have a couple more minutes. I wonder, Kathleen, do you have any insights on the new question about Should the excluded bibliography setting be saved when downloading a PDF of the similarity report? Why would it be downloaded without that setting saved? Do you have any insights as to that?
I do not. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't save that. I don't know if Rose or Audrey, if you have any, if you exclude, I don't know if you exclude the bibliographies when you're doing your checks. But I don't know why, if you're excluding it, why you would then unexclude it from the PDF download. I guess I don't quite understand the question. I'm sorry.
If I can say something,
Sure.
the report, when you download the report is the sources are included in the report. So you can't just download the PDF without downloading the report, the sources and all that. You can't download without that. So I don't know if and I don't think it's worth removing the sources. I don't think, because I think it can help the author to go back to the sources and see how we can improve his manuscript.
Thank you, Audrey, and thank you, Kathleen. I'm just going through to see if there are any other unanswered questions.
I know we've had a lot of questions about AI detection, because that's been a big thing, and kind of been up and down, because Turnitin has provided that for some of the products that they provide, which are separate from the software that we use with Similarity Check. And we did some testing of it, gosh, at this point is maybe a year ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. We did some testing with our advisory group and some other testers we chose and of our members, and they were not pleased with the results of that. So we went back to Turnitin to let them know that we weren't quite ready to offer that to our members because we didn't think it was good enough. There were a lot of false positives. There were a lot of issues with it, and we weren't confident in providing that at that time. So we are still working with Turnitin. So at this time, the AI detection is not available with Similarity Check. We are still having a discussion with Turnitin and working with them to see if this can be improved. And if it is, then down the line, hopefully we can offer that in some capacity, maybe as a separate add-on, or maybe something that is offered directly through Turnitin separately. So keep an eye on our blogs, and we'll announce if and when that is available, but at this time it is not available.
Thank you for that, Kathleen. And we're almost at the hour. We are almost at the end of the time. I want to thank all of our speakers today for sharing their valuable time and expertise with all of us. I hope the attendees found it useful, and I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar and for making their valuable time available. I hope everyone found this useful. We'll be in touch with materials from this webinar. And it was great to see everyone, and I wish everybody a good rest of their day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.